Before we unearth tonight's archive, take a moment to look around the room you are lying in. Adjust your pillows, strike a match, light up a light, and settle deep into the darkness. The eldest daughter of the Perron's house, Andrea Perron, admitted to a lingering habit born directly from this case. She stated, "I cannot sleep without a light on and sound in the background, and that began at the farm." Tonight, follow that exact advice. Keep your light burning, because tonight you are entering the raw, unfiltered history behind a farmhouse that Hollywood modified for the silver screen. Think about the classic horror movies you watch to get a good scare. You love the endings, where the brave investigators stand their ground, read from a holy book, and cast the demon back into the abyss. The family hugs, the music swells, and safety is restored. But what if I told you that in the real case behind The Conjuring, that ending never happened? The creators of the film took a standard commercial liberty, choosing to alter the timeline to show that the case was cleanly solved. Hollywood frequently modifies real-life accounts to provide a clean narrative resolution and a definitive happy ending for the audience. But in reality, the investigation did not end in a triumph of faith. Andrea Perron explicitly detailed the truth. Even though The Conjuring is an excellent film, it's about 95% fiction and about 5% hard truth. Welcome back to Ghostly Tales. Tonight, we pull back the Hollywood curtain. We are going to look at the real journal logs, the historical records, and the actual statements from Ed and Lorraine Warren to unearth the 5% hard truth. Before diving deep into the terrifying events of 1971, I want to ask you a question. Look at your screen right now and drop a comment below. Do you believe Hollywood should be allowed to change real horror histories to make a happy ending, or do you prefer the raw, unresolved truth? I'm reading your comments tonight, and your feedback builds this community. In January of 1971, Roger and Caroline Perron purchased the Old Arnold Estate, a massive 200-acre property containing a beautiful 14-room colonial farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. They moved in with their 5 young daughters, expecting a peaceful, rural lifestyle. But the house had a bloody history that spanned 8 generations, multiple suicides by hanging in the attic, accidental drownings in the property's cell, and historical tragedies had occurred on the land over the centuries, leaving an underlying sense of unease in the structure. At first, the manifestations were deceptive. Andrea Perron later recalled a strange duality to the home, stating, "There were spirits that we liked and spirits that we didn't. The girls would watch an unseen presence that seemed to move a broom across the kitchen floor, while others would gently slide items across the rooms. The family grew to respect the baseline rhythm of the old house, but the calm was a trap. As the brutal Rhode Island winter set in, sealing the windows shut with thick ice, the lighter anomalies ceased and a far more dominant, territorial presence began to manifest. The family began waking up in the dead of night to the sound of something heavy dragging itself through the walls. Doors that were locked with iron bolts would violently slam open at 3 o'clock in the morning. The air inside the house grew heavy, cold, and smelled distinctly of stagnant swamp water and old decay. While the young daughters focused on the anomalies upstairs, the physical center of the terror was localized in a space the family actively avoided: the pitch-black, dirt-floored basement. Unlike modern basements, the cellar of the Arnold estate was a damp, subterranean tomb with uneven mud floors, sweating stone walls, and a low ceiling. The family stayed away from it, but the entities operating in the house knew how to force them down there. Every winter, the house's heating equipment and oil furnace would mysteriously fail, cutting off the heat in the middle of freezing sub-zero nights. This forced Roger Perron, the father, to grab a flashlight and venture into the mud cellar, alone. Andrea Perron later documented her father's exact, terrifying routine in her books. The moment Roger stepped off the wooden stairs onto the cold dirt floor, the air would change. It didn't just grow cold, it smelled putrid. Roger reported feeling what he described as a cold, stinking presence materialize directly behind his neck. It didn't touch him, it would simply breathe. He could hear the low, wet, rhythmic respiration of something standing inches from his back, while he frantically tried to repair the furnace machinery in the dark. Think about the sheer psychological torture of that situation. You know something is waiting for you in the mud beneath your home, but you have to go down into the dark just to keep your children and wife from freezing to death. The primary entity driving the escalation was identified by investigators as Bathsheba Sherman, a real historical woman born in 1812, lived on the land in the 19th century. Hollywood portrayed her as an outright demon-worshipping witch who hung herself from a tree. But here is where we must look at the real, accountable history. Historically, there is absolutely zero evidence that Bathsheba Sherman was a witch. She was a regular woman, married to a man named Jedson Sherman, and she died at the age of 73 from natural causes, specifically a sudden paralysis or stroke. She was buried legally and peacefully in the Harrisville Cemetery in Harrisville, Rhode Island, where her tombstone still stands today, heavily guarded and heavily visited. So why did she get such a horrifying reputation? The dark folklore began because of a tragic real-life event. While living on the farm, an infant child in Bathsheba's care died mysteriously. Upon medical examination, it was discovered that a sharp instrument, suspected to be a thick iron sewing needle, had been driven directly into the base of the baby's skull. The local townspeople were horrified. They openly accused Bathsheba of murdering the infant as an offering to the devil. She went to trial for infanticide, but due to a complete lack of physical evidence, she was acquitted and set free. Though the courts found her innocent, the public never did. She lived out the rest of her life as a social outcast, a woman cursed by her neighbors, and in death, that collective human hatred seemed to warp whatever energy she left behind on the property. Years later, Andrea Perron investigated her own house's history and admitted that Bathsheba may have been wrongly accused of the house's modern evil. Andrea stated, "Essentially, Bathsheba copped the blame for everything evil, and it simply wasn't the case. She was wrongly blamed, but whether it was Bathsheba's spirit or something far older hiding under her name, the entity targeted Caroline Perron with absolute malice." Caroline woke before dawn one morning to a sight that was reported in the Providence Journal in August of 1977. The archival record states that Caroline found an apparition by her bed, the head of an old woman hanging off to one side, over an old gray dress. The entity stared down at her and hissed a terrifying warning, "Get out. Get out. I'll drive you out with death and gloom." Shortly after, Caroline began discovering deep, bleeding puncture wounds on her legs that perfectly mimicked the size and shape of an old-fashioned iron sewing needle. In 1974, the parents contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren. When Ed Warren first inspected the property, his field notes records were absolute and clinical. He publicly stated his assessment of the forces operating on the land, writing, "Diabolical forces are formidable. These forces are eternal, and they exist today." Lorraine Warren, using her mediumship, felt a suffocating presence immediately upon entering the parlor. She later reflected on the case with a quote that frames their entire methodology, stating, "However sordid the circumstances, At the center of all demonic incidents is a human being in great trouble. Because the Warrens were lay people, they could not perform a Catholic exorcism, which requires Vatican approval. Instead, they decided to run an intensive seance to confront the spirit directly. The ritual did not happen in the basement. It took place on the ground floor, inside the home's small, isolated common room. Andrea Perron secretly watched the entire nightmare unfold through a narrow crack in the heavy wooden door. Her first-hand description of what happened to her mother is the literal definition of real-life trauma. Andrea stated in her official interviews, "I thought I was going to pass out. My mother began to speak a language not of this world in a voice not her own. Her chair levitated and she was thrown across the room." Let's dissect that specific real detail. Caroline Perron didn't just scream. The physical weight of her body, along with the heavy wooden chair she was sitting in, was lifted entirely off the ground by an invisible force. She hung suspended in the dead air of the common room, before being violently hurled 10 feet across the floorboards, where her body slamming hard against the stone fireplace. When she opened her mouth, the voice that emerged from her lips was a deep, guttural, metallic roar. It spoke in a dead, unrecognizable cadence, screaming with such violent force that it tore Caroline's vocal cords apart from the inside, causing dark blood to leak from her mouth. The case was far from resolved. The seance had triggered a level of chaotic escalation that no one in the room was prepared to handle. Seeing his wife in a state of extreme distress, Roger Perron intervened. Convinced that the investigation was causing direct harm, he ordered the Warrens and their team to pack their equipment and leave the property immediately. The investigators departed in the middle of the night, and the connection between the family and the Warrens was permanently severed. But the true tragedy of the Perron case lies in what happened after the investigators left. The severe economic recession of the 1970s left the family entirely broke, having sunk their life savings into the 200-acre property. The house was completely unsellable in that market, and they had nowhere else to go. But the Perron family was forced to live inside that active haunting for 6 more consecutive years. Imagine that reality. You are too poor to save your children from a ghost. Andrea Perron summarized their survival with incredible maturity, saying, "The film portrayed a Hollywood scene of Ed and Lorraine casting out a so-called demon, and everybody lived happily ever after. That's not what happened, not at all. Sometimes there is no happy ending. Sometimes survival is a success story all its own." They finally saved enough resources to flee the estate in 1980. The house in Harrisville still stands today, a silent monument to 10 years of unbroken human endurance. If you were stuck in a house you couldn't afford to sell, and your family was targeted, would you have survived those 10 years, or broken down? The parents escaped, but their experiences stand as an accountable reminder that real horror is rarely wrapped up neatly in a 2-hour cinema script. Thank you for staying with us tonight. If you like this video, please leave a like and send this to a friend who thinks The Conjuring was a completely true documentary. And finally, new videos drop every single week on this channel, so make sure to subscribe and turn on that notification bell to join our circle in the dark. Look after yourselves, and sleep well tonight.